Week 1 is in the books, so it's on to week 2. We're here to help you nail those lineup decisions by talking through the QB ranks and tiers for week 2 with all the stats, facts you need to be confident in setting your lineups. Tom, we're going to start at the top with the superstar tier, the S tier. There's only 2 players. They played last week and both were quite frankly phenomenal. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. Of course, you got them, you're starting them, no questions asked.
Yeah, I think obviously the biggest takeaway here is that both picked up right where they left off at the end of last season, both clear MVP candidates. And for fantasy, I just hope both these defenses play like this throughout the year, because if we're going to see them forced into shootout mode, those like playing much more pass heavy, playing much more aggressive than we perhaps see them at times because of the state of their defense, then that can only be good news for fantasy football.
Yeah, absolutely. And the encouraging thing for Josh Allen, the emergence of potentially a number 1 wide receiver in Con Coleman last week. That's, this is a guy that's had numerous overall QB1 finishes. If we can get a bump from his wide receiver core, it's only going to be even better for him moving forward.
Yeah, and just from a matchup perspective this week, obviously the Bills playing against the Jets. Perhaps the Jets defense puts on a better show than the Ravens did last week. Perhaps the Ravens find it a bit more of a tough time against the Browns, but I don't think either of those are games that you should be remotely worried about, and I'd be quite happy to start as many pieces as possible from those offenses.
Yeah, so then we're going to dive into the next tier, the cover boy of this show, the thumbnail. Joe Burrow kicks it off. Now, another disappointing week 1. It feels like the Bengals can never start well, but let's be honest, a dream matchup. We know that he's got all the opportunities in terms of the wide receiver core. Do we expect a huge bounce back from Joe Burrow this week?
It would be nice to see. I mean, like, this Bengals team spent so much of the offseason talking about how they'd learn from their mistakes, how they were going to do things differently, how they were going to play their starters in preseason to avoid this. And when the starters played in preseason, it didn't look pretty. This has been a case all along. And, this is why I keep saying that Zach Taylor is probably one of the coaches who deserves to be fired the most. Just Joe Burrow has not played well to start seasons, but he's also not played well against the Browns. Across his last 7 games against the Browns, he's averaged 13.2 points per game. That's about 8 points less than he averages normally. He's also averaging less than 200 passing yards against him. It's one of those divisional funky things, but they do have his number. Now, this week against the Jags, the Bengals are favored by almost 4 points. The Jags last week, their defense didn't look particularly great. There's reports out there that they're going to play Travis Hunter on defense more this week, which would certainly make sense. I think, though, that for the Bengals to be at home against the Jags, this one has to be a kind of bounce back spot for Joe Burrow. And I'd have no qualms about starting him. I think that he's definitely somebody for DFS purposes that you could look at Joe Burrow double stacks and feel fairly comfortable.
Absolutely. And part of the issue last week was the Browns, Myles Garrett decided he wanted to turn up and play. Yes, there's Josh Hines-Allen, but there's nobody that's that terrifying on this Jaguars front. So hopefully the Bengals offensive line can hold up a little bit more. And, you look at last week, the Bengals 29 dropbacks, only 22 of those resulted in pass attempts. So that was 7 either sacks or throwaways. Like when a quarter of your dropbacks are resulting in a pass not being attempted, that's a serious issue. Hopefully that can be alleviated and then move on. Rounding out the A tier, we've got Jalen Hurts and Jayden Daniels, mix of passing ability, decent over-unders and rushing. They're must-starts, aren't they?
Yeah, and obviously Jayden Daniels this week goes in the Thursday night game, so we won't dwell on him too much. I think that he'll be fine. He just needs Terry McLaurin to step up a little bit more. Jalen Hurts, I mean, honestly, it's just wild watching Twitter reactions, because there are the Jalen Hurts believers and then those who will look at the stats. And I like Jalen Hurts for fantasy, but it's hard to ignore the fact that his average depth of target last week was 31st. The only guys who were behind him were Aaron Rodgers and Jared Goff. But it doesn't really matter for fantasy. I mean, his 9 scrambles were the most in week 1, 3 more than anyone else. And we haven't really seen as much scrambling from him at certain times. But yeah, I think Jalen Hurts, of course, you're starting him in this game against the Chiefs. Has the potential to be high scoring, but it also has the potential to be a little bit lower scoring. But there's no way you're benching him.
Yeah, I think if you're starting Jalen Hurts, you need to just not watch the game and just check the box score afterwards. Probably make everyone much happier. If you're finding this for the first time, though, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button while you're there. We do these ranking shows every week: quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, as well as all the off-season content you could ever dream of. We're going to move over to the B tier now. We've got this is the really interesting tier, because I feel like these are some guys that, if you're in a Superflex league, maybe you've got a couple, maybe you've got decisions to make here. But we've got Kyler Murray as our QB6. Now, I was really impressed at the volume of running. We saw 4 scrambles on top of 3 schemed up runs, 7 rush attempts. That's fantasy gold. Were you impressed as him as a passer on top of that potential rushing?
I just thought Kyler looked comfortable last week, which isn't something we could always say, but he's had a stable offseason. He had Marvin Harrison there throughout, whereas last year there was all the dispute about Marvin Harrison's naming rights, all that sort of rubbish. He was dealing with injuries at various points under this new coaching staff. So to have a stable offseason seems to have really made a difference. I think this matchup against Carolina is just easily one which we have to be targeting. The Cardinals are favored by almost a touchdown. Last time they played last year, Kyler had 8 for 63 and a touchdown on the ground. And I just can't think of any reason to drop him any lower than where we've got him at QB6.
Absolutely. And the encouraging thing for me was the Cardinals moving Marvin Harrison around. They were, scheming up touches. They weren't just saying, you line up here, you run the most difficult routes and expect to win. They were making his life easier. And by doing that, they made Kyler's life much easier. Also in this tier, we've got Justin Fields. Look, I'm biased. I thought that was the best Justin Fields game I've ever watched. I thought his pocket presence was phenomenal. I thought there were multiple times he stepped up into the pocket, which is something I never saw with him in any of his previous stops. It felt like he'd just keep drifting back and try and throw it in late. Were you as positive after last week and hopeful looking forward?
Yeah, I can't remember how many years it's been, but I saw a wild stat that it had been something like 10, 15 years since the Jets had scored 32 points, Rich. I'm sure you know that better than me.
That's incredibly unfair. But yeah, I think it's probably about that.
Yeah. So, look, I mean, you've got to take the positives out of it, and it was a shame that they didn't get the win. But this offense, Fields looked comfortable. Again, that's something which we're using and we'll use for Justin Herbert. But also, this was kind of what we expected. It was the heaviest run offense in situation neutral pass rate at 65%. Like, they were just running the ball whenever they could. I think that we're going to see that against the Bills again, because the Bills defense, they want to play light. And when you force them into running situations like the Ravens did at times, it can really throw them off. Now, obviously, Breece Hall isn't Derrick Henry, but Breece Hall looked excellent last week. And if they can rely on Justin Fields, if they can rely on Garrett Wilson, if they can rely on Breece Hall, that's pretty much all they really need to be. And this one, I mean, it's a 45.5 over-under. Again, I kind of feel like this one could go under, but I don't hate it all. I think that it's going to be a fun game, and I feel like we start Justin Fields until we have a reason not to.
Yeah, 100%. And we move from one of the run heaviest offenses to, surprisingly, one of the pass heaviest offenses in the Los Angeles Chargers last week. Justin Herbert, absolutely superb. Really, really impressive, I thought. What are your thoughts looking into this week?
Yeah, like the Chargers, they were first in pass rate over expected, which was definitely not what anybody expected coming off the offseason. Everybody was concentrating on this idea that the Chargers are going to become run heavy because that's what Greg Roman's done, because they brought in Amarian Hampton and Najee Harris. And in reality, we saw the bigger difference being another year of development for Quentin Johnston, Ladd McConkey doing Ladd McConkey things, then Keenan Allen showing up and being an excellent third or second wide receiver. And I just think that we're seeing, again, like Kyler Murray, the benefit of a healthy offseason for Justin Herbert. Last year, he was injured, but we're kind of seeing him feeling comfortable in this offense, feeling comfortable with his receivers. And we also saw him moving around with his feet more than we have done at times. I mean, you go back to the start of last year, and he's now had 7 games since then with 28 or more rushing yards. That's a really healthy rushing floor. It'd be nice if you could just get that kind of above 30, 35. But 28 yards or so on average is really going to give him a comfortable floor. And when you're able to throw 300 yards, multiple touchdowns, that's going to be good. I do think this matchup with the Raiders are a team I'm eyeing and just think that they're going to take the air out of games sometimes. But for now, I think that you can start Justin Herbert with confidence in 1 QB leagues.
Yeah, 100% agree on everything you've said there. We're going to move on to our C tier. We'll fire through this a little bit quicker. So let's start at the top. Patrick Mahomes, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, this was better from Patrick Mahomes for fantasy than we've seen. This was his 4th 26-point game in the last 3 years. We haven't seen these kind of massive fantasy outputs. And if you told me he did that without Xavier Worthy on the field for the entire game, I'd be a little bit surprised, particularly with no Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce not earning targets in the way that he used to. Yes, he got there on the touchdown, but this was kind of all about just peppering Marquise Brown. Now, whether that's a tactic that you want to rely on long-term or not is up for discussion. But against the Eagles, who we know have a really good offense, I think that we're going to see Patrick Mahomes have to at least try and sustain that rate.
Yeah, and then moving on to Dak Prescott. I know he didn't have the greatest fantasy game last week, but I thought he was absolutely phenomenal. The ball was on time, exactly where it needed to be. If anything, he was slightly let down by the receiving call.
Yeah, very much so. Those kind of drops from CeeDee Lamb, quite uncharacteristic. Perfect bounce back spot against the Giants. The Giants do not look like a great team. Yes, they're going to bring pressure up front, but I'd have full confidence starting Dak. And the last 3 times that he scored 8 or fewer fantasy points, he scored 18 plus for next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we move across to Baker Mayfield. Obviously, we saw the big breakout game for Igbuka. Do you think it's going to continue and allow Baker Mayfield multiple targets of which he can buoy his fantasy production?
I think so. I mean, this just tracks with everything we saw through the offseason. You know, Igbuka was talked up by numerous veterans as being special, and he showed it. I thought, probably not going to get 2 touchdowns every week. But then Baker Mayfield, I mean, we've been talking all offseason about how his efficiency is probably going to take a step back, how he's probably not going to rush as much. Well, he had 3 touchdowns on 17 completions, and he also had 5 for 39 on the ground. So, I mean, he's putting it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing is that Baker felt like he lived on the edge last week. There were some throws that he missed, I thought, early, and there were some throws that he probably shouldn't have attempted late that he did manage to complete. So if he's going to live on the edge every week like that, I feel like it's going to be slightly up and down. We're going to move across to, I was slightly disappointed last week in the Patriots. I'm not going to lie. Drake May, is this a big bounce back week?
Well, the key kind of comes, I mean, they're playing Miami, who allowed the Colts to score on every single drive that they had last week. So, I mean, Miami looked even worse than we thought they might do. So, yeah, I hope so. I mean, Drake May only had 11 rushing yards last week. That was his lowest in a start since he took over last year. Before now, he'd only had 2 below 24. So I think the key is this something that is scheme related and Josh McDaniels isn't designing enough running game for him? Or was that something that against the Raiders, they just didn't like the looks they were getting? So I'd like to see him use his legs a little bit more. I'd like to keep seeing that Kayshon Boutte deep connection. I'd like to see Hunter Henry involved a little bit more. But if he can't put up a good fantasy game against Miami, then it will be time to start consider dropping him down into the D tier until we see more.
Yeah, absolutely. This feels like a make or break week for him in 1 QB leagues. If he doesn't turn up this week, it's probably time to move on. Trevor Lawrence, I said in my write-up, every time he takes a step forward and does something ridiculous and impressive, the next play does something stupid and absolutely mind-boggling. Do you think that we can find some consistency from him, or is this just the type of play he's going to be?
I'm a little concerned, because there was no quarterback who was pressured less than Trevor Lawrence last week, which, given the way the game went, you felt like, well, something must have been disrupting him. But the Bengals, between Shamar Stewart and between Trey Hendrickson, I think that there is enough of a pass rush there where they are going to upset Trevor Lawrence at times. He needs to get the ball out quickly. He needs to get it moving, and he needs to get it moving downfield, because otherwise the Bengals are going to leave him in the dust. And again, it's another player where we're going to talk about a few players who could move up a tier after this, but Trevor Lawrence feels like one who's on the precipice of moving down a tier.
Yeah, 100%. It's, I'm a huge Trevor Lawrence guy, but I'm starting to get nervous right now. One player I'm not nervous on, though, Jordan Love. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal last week, and I'm so excited about what he could be moving forward as we start to see this receiving core round into shape and players start to step up. Are you with me on that?
Yeah, I think the Thursday night matchup with the Commanders is a really interesting one. I think the way the Packers using their offense, it's going to be quite diverse and quite frustrating for fantasy at times. But Jordan Love should definitely be a useful player, definitely startable every week in 2 QB leagues.
And then rounding out the tier, we got JJ McCarthy. Felt like it was a game in 2 halves last week. Looked like a rookie in the first half, but I was so impressed with him in the second half. I think that gives me so much more confidence in him moving forward. And it's weird. I feel quite confident starting him even in 1 QB leagues this week.
Yeah, and the one thing that stood out, there were many things that stood out, but the rushing touchdown was fantastic. The way that he picked his moment for it, the way he fought to get to the goal line, I just thought it was a really mature second half performance. And the Falcons, who they play this week, aren't a team that I'd be particularly worried about on defense. The Vikings are favored by 5. And I think we saw everything we needed to see from JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, and then the final person in the tier, we got Bo Nix. We disagree slightly on this. You've got him at QB 14. I've got him down at QB 17. I was really disappointed with his performance last week. Are you expecting a bounce back week?
Yeah, I am. I mean, last week felt very uncharacteristic for Bo Nix. There wasn't much on the ground. His passing rate, I think he had 25 completions out of 40 pass attempts. But I talked up the Titans defense. I said that I think the Titans defense are a better unit than people believe coming into the season. I don't necessarily think the Colts are. The Colts had their way with Tua, but Tua's not a good quarterback. I think Bo Nix is a good quarterback. And this is kind of a litmus test for how we view maybe Bo Nix and the Colts moving forward. And I'm just willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. We've seen enough from Bo Nix over the last year where I believe he's a good fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, and then moving into our D tier. So here we've got Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy. We're expecting him to not play this week. Geno Smith, Jared Goff, CJ Stroud, Michael Penix. Now, Geno Smith, my sleeper of the week. If you're looking for a dart throw, I'm excited about the matchup against the Chargers. I think that could be high scoring. Your sleeper of the week, you got Michael Penix. Why are you in on Penix as a potential dart throw?
So Michael Penix last week, despite the fact that he only had Drake London really out there, I know there were others. I know Cal Pitts played better than he's probably played in a while, but the majority of the game was going through Cal Pitts, and he just seemed very good with it. He seemed very calm. All the talk about how the offensive line could be a problem. Well, he was only sacked once, which was reassuring. So even when the pressure was coming, he was evading it. He was dealing with it. He was getting the ball out on time. And then he also put up 6 for 21 on the ground. That's not something we've necessarily seen from Penix before. He is a big athletic guy, but he doesn't really rush very much because of the kind of injuries and stuff that he's dealt with in college, right? But if we're going to get a little bit more rushing production, I feel that's been a theme of what's said about a bunch of these quarterbacks, but it's so true. If you get a nice rushing floor, it just makes life so much easier.
Absolutely. And with these young quarterbacks, it seems to be once they understand, like with Justin Fields, the ability to step up in the pocket, those rushing lanes just become wide open. And that's what you saw with Penix last week was a couple of times he stepped up, there was nothing open, but he's got 10 yards of space to scramble into. And, even if you're Tom Brady and can't run or struggling to walk, you can still manage to step up into that space.
Yeah. And also, just on the Falcons, they had the 3rd most plays per game last week. If they're going to be a pace-up team, which is what we saw a bit of last year, then that's really helpful for fantasy football as well.
Yeah, and then rounding out our final 2 tiers for those of you who are playing in Superflex leagues, we've got Daniel Jones, Bryce Young, Aaron Rodgers, Tua, Matthew Stafford. And then in our F tier, we've got Russell Wilson, Cam Ward, Sam Darnold, Joe Flacco, Spencer Rattler. And then we'd slot in Mac Jones when Brock Purdy is ruled out. Remember, if you've got any other start-sit decisions, get them in the comments below and ensure you're checking out our running back, wide receiver, and tight end rankings videos dropping over the next few days.